I stared at the computer screen confirming the wire transfer. The $185 million proving my life work at Verdant Horizon Agriculture had just changed the world. Right then, the office door burst open. The man I had been married to for 10 years walked in, handed me a forged foreclosure notice, and demanded I tell everyone we had lost everything. That was the exact moment my husband signed his own financial death warrant. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Quinn Reyes. For 12 long, blistering years, I poured every single ounce of my blood, sweat, and sanity into the unforgiving, sun-baked Colorado soil. When I first purchased the acreage, it was nothing more than cracked earth, dead sagebrush, and shattered dreams. People in the industry called me delusional. They said I was throwing my life away on a barren wasteland, but I saw an oasis where they saw dust. Through relentless physical labor, surviving grueling sub-zero winters, and spending countless sleepless nights researching advanced soil microbiology, I transformed that dead land into Verdant Horizon Agriculture. It grew into a revolutionary, fully sustainable farming enterprise that completely defied every established industry standard. I built a multi-million-dollar empire with my bare hands. My husband, Vance Sterling, was always exceptionally eager to play the role of the devoted, supportive partner whenever the cameras were rolling or when his aristocratic family was watching. He absolutely loved the aesthetic of being married to a powerful, successful woman. He would eagerly pose for agricultural magazine spreads, wearing designer flannel shirts that had never seen a day of real work, flashing his perfect, extensively practiced smile. But behind the closed doors of our sprawling, custom-built farmhouse, the reality of our marriage was entirely different and deeply toxic. Vance was silently, profoundly resentful of my success. He contributed absolutely zero effort to the farm. Instead, he spent his days rubbing elbows at elite exclusive country clubs, draining our personal bank accounts on high-stakes golf wagers and impossibly rare vintage whiskey. He was a man desperately trying to maintain the illusion of superiority among the old money aristocrats of his family lineage, feeding his fragile ego while I labored in the dirt. What Vance did not know was that my 12 years of immense sacrifice had finally culminated in a quiet, monumental victory. For the past 8 months, I had been locked in strictly confidential negotiations with a massive global eco-technology conglomerate. They had thoroughly analyzed the revolutionary irrigation systems and proprietary crop rotation models I had personally developed. They wanted the patents, they wanted the land, and they wanted the entire operation. Just 2 hours ago, I had officially signed the final paperwork and closed the buyout deal. The ultimate purchase price was a staggering $185 million. The money was already secured in an escrow account. We were completely set for a dozen lifetimes. I was sitting at my heavy oak desk, my heart hammering fiercely against my ribs, rehearsing exactly how I would break the incredible news to him. I genuinely thought this was the miraculous moment that would finally bridge the growing silent chasm between us. I foolishly believed the sheer magnitude of our new, unimaginable wealth would instantly erase all of his deep-seated insecurities. Before the joyous words could even form on my tongue, the office door violently flew open. Vance strode in, his face a flawless mask of manufactured panic and breathless terror. He slammed a thick, heavy stack of legal documents right onto the center of my desk. The papers looked incredibly official, complete with authentic-looking bank letterheads, raised notary stamps, and pages upon pages of intimidating, dense legal jargon. According to the meticulously forged pages laid out before my eyes, Verdant Horizon Agriculture was supposedly drowning in insurmountable debt and was facing an immediate irreversible foreclosure action by the central bank. Vance collapsed heavily into the leather chair opposite me, burying his face in his hands, playing the demanding role of a devastated, broken man to absolute perfection. "Quinn, it is completely over," he choked out, his voice trembling with a terrifyingly convincing layer of despair. I tried to fix it behind the scenes for weeks. I tried to leverage the last remains of my trust fund, but the bank aggressively refused. They are taking the farm. They are taking absolutely everything we own. I sat there in total deafening silence. I knew for an absolute, undeniable fact that Verdant Horizon Agriculture carried exactly zero debt. I had personally paid off the final tractor equipment loan exactly 3 years and 2 months ago. The documents sitting on my desk were a complete, elaborate, and highly calculated fabrication, but the sheer, unadulterated audacity of his lie temporarily paralyzed my vocal cords. He reached desperately across the desk, grabbing both of my hands in a tight, suffocating grip. "Listen to me very closely," he pleaded, locking his tear-filled eyes directly onto mine. "We absolutely cannot let my family know the actual truth of this situation. You know exactly how vicious and unforgiving they are. They will eagerly tear us apart. Quinn, they will parade our financial failure around Aspen like a hunting trophy. I need you to tell them that you went completely bankrupt, that the volatile market crushed your business model, and that the farm is a total unrecoverable loss. Let me handle the severe social fallout. I will tell them I am personally stepping in to shield you from potential criminal liability." He leaned closer across the mahogany wood, his breath smelling faintly of expensive morning scotch. "This lie will firmly protect us from their brutal judgment. Once the dust finally settles, we will quietly pack up our remaining things, move to an entirely different state, and start over completely fresh. Just you and me. I promise you." I stared blankly at the man I had slept next to for 10 years, feeling a glacial, unforgiving chill creep slowly through my veins. He wanted me to willingly, publicly destroy my own hard-earned reputation. He wanted me to stand completely defenseless before his snobby aristocratic relatives and voluntarily wear the humiliating brand of a total failure. "Okay," I whispered, keeping my voice deliberately hollow and weak, flawlessly playing the requested part of a broken, utterly defeated wife. "If you truly think that is the only viable way out of this nightmare, I will do it." He exhaled a loud, highly dramatic sigh of profound relief, kissing my knuckles gently before quickly rushing out of the office to supposedly make some urgent emergency phone calls. As the heavy door clicked shut behind him, the cold, razor-sharp realization settled over me. My intuition was screaming like a blaring siren in my head. The artificially rushed timeline, the impeccably forged financial documents, his sudden intense desire to flee the state immediately. It all pointed to something far more sinister than a simple fear of high society embarrassment. Vance was actively executing a highly calculated, malicious plot. He did not want to save me or our marriage. He was meticulously setting me up for an absolute slaughter. The moment the sound of his heavy car tires finally faded down the long gravel driveway, my tears dried up instantly. Panic is a luxury designed for the unprepared, and I was a woman who had spent over a decade engineering complex biological ecosystems for a living. I operated on hard data, not erratic emotion. I stood up from my desk, walked to the window, and took a long, deep breath of the crisp Colorado air. I picked up my phone and deliberately bypassed all of my usual corporate legal contacts. Instead, I reached out to a man named Elias. Elias was a highly discreet former forensic accountant turned private financial investigator, a man legendary in the darkest corporate circles of Denver for unearthing deeply buried financial skeletons. My instructions to him over the secure line were remarkably simple and utterly cold. "I need you to tear my husband apart financially, track every single movement he has made, trace every single dollar he has spent, and pull every location his phone has pinged for the last 24 months. I want 0 stones left unturned. For the next 48 hours, I forced myself to maintain the pathetic facade of a crumbling, financially desperate wife. It required a level of psychological endurance I never knew I possessed. I purposely barely ate. I stared blankly out the kitchen windows with hollow eyes, and I allowed Vance to comfort me with his sickeningly sweet, deeply manipulative assurances. Then, late on a Tuesday evening while Vance was supposedly at a late charity board meeting. Elias called me back on the encrypted application. The raw information he delivered hit my system like a physical, suffocating blow to the chest. Vance was not just aimlessly playing golf and drinking expensive vintage whiskey at his clubs. He had officially registered an obscure, highly protected limited liability company in the state of Delaware exactly 14 months ago. The covert entity was named Apex Heritage Holdings, and its heavily guarded corporate charter specifically outlined its core business purpose as acquiring distressed agricultural properties through private auctions and aggressive corporate liquidations. My hands shook uncontrollably as I scrolled through the massive digital dossier Elias had seamlessly transferred to my private server. The initial seed funding for Apex Heritage Holdings did not come from his heavily guarded, aristocratic family trust fund. It came directly from our own household. For well over a year, Vance had been meticulously and ruthlessly siphoning off our joint marital assets. He had slowly and quietly drained our high-yield emergency savings accounts, taken out unauthorized complex lines of credit against our secondary real estate investment portfolios, and skillfully skimmed substantial profits from our joint tax returns. He moved the money in small, cleverly disguised, and seemingly random increments of $8,000 or $9,500, deliberately staying just beneath the rigid banking threshold that would automatically trigger mandatory federal reporting alerts. He had systematically stolen nearly $450,000 of my own hard-earned money just to fund his private financial weapon. But the staggering financial betrayal was merely the superficial outer layer of the absolute rot infecting my marriage. Elias dug substantially deeper into the encrypted geographical tracking data, meticulously cross-referencing Vance's premium credit card receipts with his supposed amateur golf tournament schedules. There were no actual golf tournaments. Instead, there were ultra-luxury hotel bookings in downtown Seattle, incredibly lavish private dining reservations in Chicago, and deeply secluded weekend winery retreats in Napa Valley. The registered second guest on every single one of those exorbitant itineraries was a woman named Sloane Kensington. The mere sight of her name on the screen tasted like pure, highly concentrated poison on my tongue. I knew exactly who she was, without needing Elias to explain. Sloane was the notoriously ruthless and incredibly ambitious corporate procurement director for a massive, aggressive rival agricultural conglomerate. She was a woman heavily famous in our tight-knit industry for ruthlessly orchestrating hostile, deeply predatory takeovers of vulnerable, multi-generational family farms. The final, terrifying pieces of the dark puzzle violently snapped together, illuminating a vast landscape of absolute, pure evil. Vance and Sloane had not just carelessly stumbled into a cheap, sordid hotel affair. They were active, highly coordinated business partners in a massive, sophisticated corporate conspiracy. Together, they had meticulously fabricated the flawlessly fake foreclosure documents currently sitting in my office drawer. Their entire psychological strategy was flawlessly designed to break my formidable spirit, to artificially induce a state of blind, hysterical, and irrational panic. They desperately wanted me to believe that Verdant Horizon Agriculture was completely financially worthless and about to be aggressively seized by ruthless corporate bankers. They were heavily counting on my raw fear to completely blind me to the obvious legal technicalities. Once I foolishly agreed to let Vance heroically handle the social fallout and willingly signed the property over to his supposedly safe private protection, Apex Heritage Holdings would swiftly swoop in and legally acquire my entire life's work for absolute pennies on the dollar. But that was not even the final chapter of their devastating master plan. Elias brilliantly uncovered their ultimate, incredibly cruel endgame hidden deep within Sloane's hacked internal corporate email communications. The very second the distressed, heavily discounted sale to Vance's shell company was legally finalized, he planned to abruptly file for an immediate, brutal, and highly publicized divorce, leaving me with absolutely nothing but heavily fabricated debt and crushing public humiliation. Then, Vance and Sloane would immediately turn around and boldly sell the newly acquired Verdant Horizon Agriculture directly to her massive conglomerate for its true, astronomical market value. They were carefully plotting to financially slaughter me, feast luxuriously on my remains, and build their lavish, incredibly wealthy new life entirely on top of my burning ashes. I transformed myself into a masterpiece of absolute misery. To survive the days following his treacherous announcement, I had to completely disconnect my logical mind from my physical body. I became a highly trained actress, starring in a private, deeply sickening tragedy. I spent hours sitting on the edge of our massive bedroom mattress, letting my shoulders slump under the heavy, imaginary weight of total financial ruin. I practiced sobbing until my eyes were bloodshot and swollen, generating real tears by focusing on the profound grief of realizing my entire marriage was a meticulously crafted lie. Whenever Vance entered the room, I would dramatically wipe my face, intentionally letting him see the profound despair etched deeply into my features. I made myself look small, fragile, and completely broken. It was a suffocating, deeply humiliating role to play, but I embraced it with chilling precision. The true test of my psychological endurance occurred every evening in our grand formal dining room. We would sit opposite each other across the expansive mahogany table, the heavy silence punctuated only by the clinking of silver cutlery against fine bone china. Vance was thoroughly intoxicated by his own spectacular performance. He enthusiastically played the role of the remarkably steadfast, deeply compassionate savior. "We are going to get through this dark period, my love," he would smoothly murmur, his voice dripping with a thick, artificial warmth that made my stomach aggressively turn. "Money is just paper. As long as we have each other, we can rebuild from the absolute ground up." I would offer him a weak, trembling smile of immense gratitude, all while my eyes coldly tracked the subtle, rhythmic movements of his left arm. Beneath the heavy linen tablecloth, his hand was frantically busy. He was typing rapid, continuous messages on his hidden secondary phone, undoubtedly updating Sloane on the successful mental destruction of his pathetic, gullible wife. I chewed my dry roasted chicken, swallowed my burning rage, and calmly watched a monster pretend to be a saint. By Thursday evening, Vance initiated the next crucial phase of his cruel psychological operation. He poured us both generous glasses of intensely expensive red wine and adopted a gravely serious, deeply pained expression. "Quinn, there is something incredibly difficult we need to discuss," he began, letting out a heavy, perfectly rehearsed sigh. "The annual Sterling Family Autumn Gala is exactly 3 days away. I have been thinking about it endlessly. We cannot simply hide in this house like cowardly fugitives. We need to walk into that ballroom together and bravely confess our financial collapse to the entire family. It is the only honorable way. We have to rip the bandage off quickly so we can finally start our new life." I lowered my gaze, suppressing a dark, vicious urge to laugh directly in his handsome, deceptive face. I knew exactly what that gala represented. It was never about honor or bravery. It was a highly orchestrated, spectacularly cruel public execution. He was deliberately marching me to the sacrificial altar so his vicious, aristocratic relatives could publicly strip away my remaining dignity. It was the necessary social theater required to justify him abruptly abandoning a newly impoverished, highly disgraced wife. "You are absolutely right," I whispered softly, forcing a single, pathetic tear to roll slowly down my cheek. "We will face them together." While Vance spent his days eagerly preparing his formal tuxedo and finalizing his escape route with his mistress, I was operating in the shadows with lethal, hyper-focused efficiency. I drove quietly to a highly secure private banking facility located just outside the state borders. Over the course of 9 agonizingly tense hours, I worked directly with a team of elite international wealth managers. I aggressively rerouted the entire $185 million from the initial domestic escrow account. I buried the massive fortune deep within an impenetrable, heavily fortified blind offshore trust. It was an incredibly complex legal fortress, constructed of multiple interlocking corporate entities, making it entirely invisible and absolutely legally inaccessible to anyone without my exact biometric authorization. Vance could not touch a single solitary cent of my hard-earned empire. My final preparatory strike took place in the heavily shadowed, heavily soundproofed downtown office of an incredibly feared divorce litigator named Marcus. Marcus was not a gentle negotiator. He was a highly trained legal assassin. I laid out the entire, sickeningly detailed dossier containing every single wire transfer, every forged document, and the complete structural blueprint of Vance's illicit shell company. We spent 6 solid hours meticulously crafting a devastating legal counteroffensive. We prepared surgical, highly explosive injunctions specifically designed to completely paralyze his fraudulent business entity the exact millisecond I gave the final command. Every single piece of my meticulously crafted armor was securely in place. I was no longer the devastated victim my husband desperately believed me to be. I was a heavily armed predator, patiently waiting for the grand curtains to finally open. I locked the heavy oak door of my study precisely at midnight. The rest of the sprawling farmhouse was completely silent, save for the rhythmic, mechanical hum of my laser printer spitting out sheet after sheet of absolute devastation. I had successfully accessed the complete, unfiltered backup of Vance's secondary phone through Elias's highly encrypted digital portal. I sat in the dim light and printed every single sordid text message exchanged between my husband and Sloane Kensington over the past 14 months. Holding the warm, freshly printed pages in my trembling hands, I forced myself to carefully read their exact words. They did not just discuss the intricate logistics of their illegal corporate takeover, they mercilessly mocked my very existence. Sloane had typed a long message joking about how my calloused, dirt-stained hands probably felt like rough sandpaper against Vance's delicate, perfectly manicured skin. He had eagerly replied with a laughing reaction, adding that he could never completely wash the lingering scent of soil and fertilizer out of his own designer clothes after hugging me. They relentlessly ridiculed my rural, working-class upbringing, calling me a remarkably naive dirt farmer who was blindly and happily digging her own financial grave. I did not shed a single tear. I simply stacked the pages into neat, perfectly aligned piles. Each printed word was a sharp, jagged nail I was carefully preparing to drive directly into their respective coffins. Next, I meticulously assembled the undeniable, hard concrete proof of his financial treason. I printed out the complete, unredacted banking statements spanning the last 2 entire fiscal years. I used a thick red marker to methodically highlight every single unauthorized withdrawal, tracing the exact, undeniable path of our joint marital assets directly into the hidden corporate accounts of Apex Heritage Holdings. There were exactly 42 separate, meticulously calculated wire transfers. I organized the documents into a heavy, undeniable portfolio of pure embezzlement. This was not a simple, messy divorce dispute over a shared house or a luxury vehicle. This was highly documented, aggressive federal fraud. From my hidden fireproof wall safe, I retrieved the single most powerful weapon in my entire arsenal. It was the original, highly secured closing document from the global conglomerate. The thick parchment paper featured a bright red, deeply embossed notary seal, permanently authenticating the absolute transfer of Verdant Horizon Agriculture. Right in the center of the final page, printed in bold, undeniable ink, was the finalized purchase price of $185 million. I carefully folded the heavy document and deliberately slid it into the inner silk pocket of the sleek, rigid designer clutch I planned to carry to the gala. It was my ultimate trump card, resting quietly against the palm of my hand. With the explosive evidence perfectly compiled, I initiated the fatal, irreversible countdown. I contacted a highly specialized, intensely private courier service based out of Denver, a discreet firm globally known for executing highly secure deliveries for elite political figures. I handed the stoic courier a heavily sealed, tamper-proof lockbox containing exact duplicate copies of Vance's massive embezzlement trail, the forged bank foreclosure notices, and the highly illegal corporate charter of his shell company. My instructions were strictly rigid and entirely non-negotiable. The package was to be delivered directly to the regional director of the Federal Financial Crimes Investigation Bureau exactly at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the very next business day after the Sterling family gala. By the time Vance eventually woke up from his arrogant celebratory hangover, the federal agents would already be actively drafting his federal arrest warrants. I absolutely refused to walk into that massive ballroom looking like a tragic, broken victim passively waiting for the slaughter. I visited an exclusive, highly private boutique in downtown Aspen and purposefully purchased a gown that commanded absolute, terrifying authority. It was a floor-length, meticulously tailored dress in a shade of midnight blue so deep it almost looked like freezing liquid obsidian. It featured incredibly sharp, highly structured shoulders, long, elegant sleeves, and a high, unforgiving neckline. It was completely devoid of any soft, romantic lace or delicate, feminine embellishments. It was cold, it was severely rigid, and it was breathtakingly powerful. When I stared at my reflection in the tall fitting room mirror, I did not see a grieving, defeated wife who had just supposedly lost her entire farm. I saw a silent, ruthless executioner carefully preparing to swing the heavy blade. The long drive to the massive Sterling family estate on Saturday evening was a sheer masterclass in psychological torture. We sat in the dark back seat of a rented luxury town car, the heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the soft hum of the expensive tires against the winding, snow-dusted mountain roads. Vance casually reached across the cold leather seat and gently took my hand, expertly arranging his handsome, deceptive features into a flawless mask of deep, agonizing sorrow. "I know tonight is going to be incredibly difficult for you, my sweet love," he whispered softly, gently and repeatedly, stroking my knuckles with his thumb. "But we have to bravely face reality. If only you had actually listened to my advice about expanding the irrigation systems too quickly. If only you had properly implemented those corporate risk management strategies I suggested last year. Maybe the central bank would not have been so incredibly aggressive. But do not worry at all. I will absolutely not let my family judge you for your severe lack of corporate foresight. I will gladly take the heat for you." I turned my head slowly, looking deeply and calmly into his lying, calculating eyes. He was flawlessly and aggressively laying the final groundwork to publicly blame my utter financial ruin entirely on my own supposed incompetence. I felt a cold, euphoric wave of pure anticipation wash cleanly over me. "You are so absolutely right, Vance," I replied, forcing a sweet, utterly serene smile onto my trembling lips. I really should have paid much closer attention to what was actually happening right under my nose, but I am so incredibly grateful to have a husband who is eagerly willing to step up and handle all the heavy paperwork for me tonight. He smiled back highly confidently, completely oblivious to the absolute fact that he was comfortably riding in the back of a luxurious hearse of his own meticulous making. The heavy ornate brass doors of the Sterling Estate ballroom swung open, instantly engulfing us in a suffocating wall of aggressive wealth and deeply entrenched elitism. The cavernous room was absolutely packed shoulder to shoulder with the ultra-exclusive high society of Aspen. These were people who wore their immense generational fortunes like impenetrable armor. The air was thick, heavily saturated with the dizzying, overpowering sense of bespoke French perfumes and the sharp, crisp aroma of ridiculously expensive vintage champagne. The sheer volume of diamonds sparkling under the massive, cascading crystal chandeliers could have easily blinded a person. As we stepped over the threshold, a distinct, icy ripple surged through the opulent crowd. The low, sophisticated hum of polite conversation abruptly fractured into sharp, jagged whispers. I could physically feel hundreds of predatory eyes immediately locking onto my dark, rigid silhouette. Guests subtly leaned into each other behind tall, delicate crystal flutes, pointing with manicured fingers, their faces glowing with the sickening thrill of witnessing a highly anticipated social train wreck. I kept my chin perfectly level, my posture completely rigid in my midnight blue armor, gripping my small evening clutch with a terrifying calmness. Vance, meanwhile, was entirely in his element. He wrapped a heavy, possessive arm tightly around my waist, guiding me through the sea of judgmental faces while offering everyone a flawlessly practiced expression of stoic, enduring grief. He was playing the tragic, fiercely loyal hero beautifully, soaking up the silent, admiring glances of his wealthy peers. After nearly 45 agonizing minutes of enduring fake, pitying smiles and thinly veiled insults disguised as polite concern, the sharp, authoritative clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal goblet abruptly sliced through the noisy ballroom. The enormous crowd instantly parted, creating a wide, clear path toward the grand marble fireplace. Standing proudly on the slightly elevated mahogany podium was his mother, a formidable, terrifyingly cold woman draped in heavy emerald silk. She adjusted the massive diamond necklace resting against her collarbone and surveyed the breathless room with the chilling authority of an absolute monarch preparing to pass a final, brutal judgment. "Dearest friends and esteemed family," she began, her voice echoing sharply across the high, gilded ceiling. She paused perfectly, allowing the dramatic tension to aggressively build. "We are gathered here tonight for our traditional autumn celebration, but it is unfortunately shadowed by a deeply tragic, entirely preventable familial crisis." She slowly turned her piercing, aristocratic gaze directly toward me. The entire room simultaneously shifted their heads to follow her line of sight, effectively trapping me directly in the center of a massive, burning spotlight. As many of you have undoubtedly heard through the unfortunate grapevine, my daughter-in-law has sadly driven her little, overly ambitious agricultural project completely into the abyss. It appears playing in the dirt does not translate to basic financial literacy. The farm is entirely lost, drowning under an insurmountable mountain of reckless, catastrophic debt. A collective, highly theatrical gasp rippled smoothly through the wealthy crowd. It was a flawlessly executed public crucifixion. But my eyes briefly drifted away from the vicious matriarch and landed squarely on the front row of the gathered audience. Standing there, entirely unapologetic and radiating pure, toxic triumph, was Sloane Kensington. She wore a completely backless, aggressively vibrant crimson gown that screamed for attention. She held a large glass of dark red wine elegantly by the stem. As our eyes finally met across the tense, silent room, Sloane tilted her head slightly and offered me a slow, incredibly wicked, utterly victorious smirk. She actually raised her glass a fraction of an inch in my direction. A silent, deeply arrogant toast to my meticulously engineered destruction. She was absolutely reveling in the intoxicating thrill of standing inside my family circle, openly plotting to steal my life while boldly laughing in my face. Before the suffocating silence could drag on any longer, Vance smoothly detached himself from my side and confidently strode up to join his mother on the grand podium. He took the silver microphone, his face a perfect canvas of manufactured sorrow and noble resolve. "Thank you, Mother." His voice boomed softly, vibrating with fake emotion. "This is undeniably the darkest financial hour my wife has ever faced, but the Sterling family absolutely does not abandon their own in times of severe, crushing desperation. Despite the staggering, catastrophic failure of her business management, and despite the very real, terrifying threat of imminent federal banking charges hanging directly over her head, I absolutely refuse to let the woman I love go to federal prison." The crowd murmured in deep, profound admiration for his incredible, supposed sacrifice. "Therefore," Vance declared loudly, his voice swelling with highly toxic, arrogant pride, "I have personally decided to generously shoulder the entire burden of her massive, crushing debts. Through a rapid, strictly private corporate acquisition, I am personally stepping in to completely absorb the ruined estate and legally shield her from all incoming criminal liability, right on a highly practiced, invisible cue." A tall waiter dressed in a pristine white tuxedo jacket silently stepped out of the heavy velvet shadows. He walked with agonizing, deliberate slowness, directly toward where I stood, isolated in the middle of the polished marble floor. In his white-gloved hands, he carried a gleaming, perfectly polished silver tray. Resting precisely in the exact center of the cold metal surface was a heavy, solid gold fountain pen and a thick stack of aggressively bound legal contracts. It was the fraudulent transfer of ownership, the final, fatal document designed to completely surrender Verdant Horizon Agriculture directly over to his illegal shell company for absolutely nothing. The entire, massive ballroom plunged into absolute, deafening silence. Hundreds of elite guests collectively held their breath, completely mesmerized by the unfolding spectacle. They were all intently, greedily watching the pathetic, completely ruined, bankrupt wife being publicly thrown a humiliating, degrading lifeline by her incredibly generous, merciful husband. They were eagerly waiting for me to physically break, to tearfully pick up the golden pen, and to gratefully sign my entire life away in front of an audience of highly entertained, wealthy vultures. I reached out slowly, my fingers gently wrapping around the cold, heavy gold barrel of the expensive fountain pen resting on the polished silver tray. Vance beamed down at me, a sickeningly triumphant, benevolent smile stretching widely across his handsome face. He genuinely thought he had won the ultimate victory. He thought he had completely broken my spirit in front of his elite peers. I lifted the pen from the velvet lining, holding it suspended in the tense, electrifying air. The cavernous ballroom was so profoundly quiet that I could clearly hear the faint, rhythmic rustle of expensive silk gowns and the shallow, expectant breathing of the surrounding crowd. Instead of lowering the sharp nib to the fraudulent signature line, I tightly grasped both ends of the expensive writing instrument with a sudden, explosive, and violently crisp motion. I snapped the thick gold pen cleanly in half. A collective, echoing gasp aggressively tore through the massive room as I carelessly dropped the shattered halves onto the pristine white linen of the nearest cocktail table. I stood there completely motionless, watching the dark, thick black ink aggressively bleed and spread like a highly toxic, undeniable spiderweb across the immaculate fabric. Vance recoiled physically, his triumphant smile instantly freezing and then rapidly melting into a raw mask of sheer, unadulterated confusion. Before his brain could even formulate a single word of protest, I unclasped my rigid midnight blue evening clutch. My movements were agonizingly slow, highly deliberate, and radiating an absolutely terrifying calmness. I slid my fingers deep into the silk lining and retrieved the thick, heavily embossed parchment paper. I unfolded the document with a sharp, echoing flick of my wrists, ensuring the bright red, deeply pressed notary stamp caught the blinding light of the cascading crystal chandeliers above us. I stepped confidently forward and forcefully slapped the official receipt directly on top of his pathetic, forged foreclosure contract resting on the waiter's silver tray. Vance reflexively looked down, his eyes violently darting across the bold, undeniable printed ink. I watched with absolute, euphoric satisfaction as the warm color rapidly and violently drained out of his face, leaving his perfectly tanned skin a sickly, terrifying shade of ashen gray. His jaw went completely slack, his mouth hanging open as a tiny, pathetic, suffocating noise escaped his tightening throat. He was staring directly at the massive, impossible 9-digit number, proving his entire grand conspiracy was a total, pathetic failure. I turned my back to him, facing the hundreds of staring, incredibly wealthy elites who had just been eagerly anticipating my public execution. Thank you so incredibly much for your wildly generous and highly public offer. Vance, I announced loudly, my voice ringing out clear, completely freezing, and echoing powerfully off the high gilded ceilings. But your heroic financial rescue is entirely unnecessary today. Verdant Horizon Agriculture is absolutely not bankrupt. In fact, the entire estate and all of its associated patents were officially and irrevocably sold yesterday afternoon to a massive global eco-technology conglomerate. The finalized, fully verified purchase price was exactly $185 million. The suffocating silence immediately shattered into a chaotic, deafening roar of shocked whispers, frantic gasps, and overlapping, highly agitated voices. I absolutely did not give them a single, precious second to mentally recover. I immediately marched straight toward the elevated mahogany podium where his mother currently stood, her arrogant posture completely frozen in absolute, undeniable horror. I reached into the hidden, expanded compartment of my oversized evening clutch and pulled out a thick, densely packed manila envelope. I thrust the heavy package directly into the formidable matriarch's trembling, jewel-encrusted hands. Inside that envelope, I projected my voice sharply so the entire crowded front row could hear every single devastating syllable, is the complete, thoroughly documented, and highly undeniable proof of your beloved son's extensive, deeply pathetic embezzlement. It meticulously details exactly how he systematically stole hundreds of thousands of dollars of our joint marital assets to illegally fund a highly predatory, covert shell company. It also contains hundreds of deeply explicit, utterly disgusting text messages thoroughly detailing his 14-month-long, filthy romantic affair. I pivoted sharply on my heels, my eyes locking directly onto the aggressively vibrant crimson gown standing rigidly in the front row. Sloane Kensington was absolutely no longer smirking. Her arrogant, highly manufactured confidence had completely evaporated, violently replaced by the raw, animalistic terror of a highly ambitious woman who suddenly realized she was caught in a fatal, inescapable trap. I took 3 slow, deliberate, incredibly intimidating steps toward her, purposefully turning the invisible, burning spotlight directly onto her highly publicized corporate reputation. "And to the lovely, incredibly ambitious Sloane Kensington," I said, my tone dripping with lethal, freezing venom, carefully ensuring every single powerful corporate investor in the immediate vicinity was listening very closely. Vance did not just steal from my personal bank accounts to fund his little illegal venture. My private forensic investigators discovered a highly interesting secondary cash flow. He actively and secretly heavily leveraged the highly restricted corporate investment funds directly from your own rival agricultural conglomerate to financially back his illegal shell company. You genuinely thought you were brilliantly orchestrating a flawless, hostile corporate takeover, Sloane, but you carelessly left a massive, glaring trail of digital financial evidence. That undeniable evidence heavily implicates both of you in orchestrating a massive, multi-million-dollar federal corporate fraud scheme. The federal financial investigators have already officially received the complete, unredacted corporate files this morning. Sloane physically stumbled backward, completely losing her elegant balance. She dropped her expensive crystal wine glass, allowing it to shatter violently against the hard, polished marble floor, creating a sharp, crashing symphony that perfectly signaled her absolute, irreversible professional destruction. Vance let out a raw, incredibly desperate sound of pure, unadulterated panic. He lunged frantically off the wooden podium, blindly reaching out his shaking arms to grab my hand, desperately trying to aggressively salvage the rapidly burning wreckage of his entire life. I took a swift, highly graceful step backward, moving completely out of his desperate reach. I retrieved the final, heavily folded legal document from my clutch. With a swift, incredibly powerful motion, I threw the pre-signed, legally binding divorce papers directly at his chest. The thick white pages hit his expensive tuxedo jacket heavily and scattered messily across the polished floor directly at his feet. I absolutely did not say another single word. I turned my back on the pathetic, trembling, entirely broken man I had once loved and strode powerfully down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The massive, elite crowd violently parted for me, their faces completely pale and terrified, hurriedly stepping back as if I were a burning, completely unstoppable force of nature. I pushed open the heavy brass front doors and stepped out into the freezing, remarkably crisp, and beautifully silent night air of the Colorado mountains. the valet silently handed me the cold metal keys to my car. I slid effortlessly into the driver's seat, the engine instantly roaring to life with a deep, incredibly satisfying growl. I slammed my foot heavily on the gas pedal, the tires kicking up a fierce, aggressive spray of loose gravel as I aggressively accelerated down the long, winding, dark driveway. I drove extremely fast into the vast, beautifully dark expanse of the cold mountain night. Behind me, I permanently left a treacherous, wildly lying husband actively facing complete and total financial ruin, highly severe impending federal criminal investigations, and the absolute, highly irreversible destruction of his precious, arrogant, aristocratic reputation. Ahead of me, the open road stretched out endlessly, serving as a beautiful, completely blank canvas marking the official, brilliant beginning of an incredibly free, unimaginably wealthy, and entirely radiant new life. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.